Hi, Namaste, and welcome to the Yoga Out of the Box podcast. My name is Marv. I'm your host. I'm myself, yoga teacher, and on this podcast, we interviewing the most interesting people around the yoga space internationally. We talk about all the yoga related topics which are interested to you as a community. So this project is based on the will to really unite the yoga community, to make yoga a modern kind of lifestyle and make it accessible for everybody. So if you haven't yet, please subscribe to the show, follow us on Instagram, Spotify, or wherever you listen to this podcast. And please share this podcast and these episodes. So today, I bring you like a super interesting conversation I really enjoyed with Dr. Alex Paris, a yoga teacher based in Berlin. Alex studied medicine and is teaching in a really modern way of understanding the profound anatomy and physiology of the human body, as well as like integrating his own journey of how he had become a yoga teacher, his approach to philosophy. And we talked about such a lot of great topics, from what makes you a great yoga teacher, how do you make this leap to really say, okay, I want to live from that, and yeah, what are the basic needs you need to know and need to do to become a good yoga teacher in the first place. And in the end, we also covered one of Alex's favorite topics and one of the most important topics. I think it's about veganism in yoga itself. And yeah, at the same time, we were like chatting about like a lot of great stuff. I hope you enjoyed this episode as much as I do, and I would say without any further things, let's dive directly deep into it. Enjoy. Good. Alex, who are you, and why is it a good idea to talk with you about the topic of yoga?
Hi, Marv. Thanks a lot for having me here. I'm always honored to have the opportunity to share some insights into what I really love doing. Why should we speak about yoga? That's a good question. I think for multiple reasons. Maybe one of them is that yoga is growing a lot. So I think it's something that's becoming more and more important in people's lives. And maybe the other reason could be it's growing, but it's also quite difficult to define what yoga is today. There's so many different forms, so many different ways of practicing it. I guess it can be a bit daunting or complex for people to grasp what it is. So I think those are two pretty good reasons to speak about yoga.
Absolutely. I think this is like already a great start to get more into the topics we want to speak today. So maybe for the listeners who don't even know you already, could you give us like a short background about your own journey in yoga and your own story?
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty basic. I was never searching for yoga. It just happened to me. Um, And one day I took a class and it just resonated. And the way the teacher was, the way she was just showing up and holding the space and fostering the community around her classes just really inspired me to. I don't even know why I was going back to the classes so much, to be very honest. When I think back, I think mostly for the community. And so I just kept coming back because I enjoyed being around those people that were coming to the classes, and it was a very intimate group. And then that got me hooked. And then along the way, many different reasons started to pop up. So probably it was community first, but then it evolved to really being interested by the physical aspect of yoga and wanting to achieve certain poses and goals. I'm talking like the first couple of years here. And then it evolved to, oh, this is actually really important for my life. And I kind of need it to feel also really good and grounded. Um, and then it shifted as like becoming a yoga teacher. Now yoga has also a different meaning, is an additional meaning, and that is also my profession, my job.
Well, there's so much in there. I think it's super interesting to see that you started like really from the community aspect, which is like
Mm,
for most of the people maybe in the first place not super in focus when they join their first yoga classes. I think a lot of people nowadays have typical stages, like you described in the beginning, want to get more flexible, start from
mm,
the physical aspect, and then feel how much better they feel and how much change inside and outside as well. And for a lot of people I talk to, the community aspect comes way later. But this is great that you already started with this and have the space to feel that. So, when you started your yoga journey as now for your profession, what inspired you to really take this step ahead and say, okay, it's not just about like joining this space, but also creating the space by yourself for people?
mm. Right. I'll just say one more thing about the community. I think it's still the transformation that happens inside is very connected to to that community aspect. I think when we start to
Mm.
to feel better in our body, when we move together with others, it just feels like a natural extension to connect to those people and to share um, important moment. I think practicing yoga for me and going to teacher trainings, especially teacher trainings, really made me see a whole other aspect of human connection that I didn't know was possible. So, for example, when you do a 200-hour or a 300-hour training, you're with if you're doing an intensive form, you're going to be with some
Mm.
people together in a building or in a retreat center for a month together, and like the bonds that you create and the intimacy you can create with people who are strangers, I think is amazing. And I think yoga facilitates that so much because it is a physical and embodied practice, and it involves using the body through breath exercises and movement. And so when you become more comfortable with your own body, when you do all of this embodiment, then connection with other bodies and other people becomes even more meaningful and important. So I think it's very related, the inside and the outside.
Mm.
Um, but yeah, let me answer to your second question, which was I forgot now.
So no worries. Just to hang on to this point, I think it's like exactly what most people feel when they first join like a teacher training, that what they can get from a yoga class in general. If you have like a constant class of people, that you really feel that most of the people who get attracted to yoga also are on the same vibe as you know, and you have already like a really kind of base you can like make your own experience on too. And
Mm,
even with the body work, I think this is like a great way to exchange this energy. So my first question in the place was, how do you get like, or how do you make this step ahead and said, okay,
right, right,
from your
yeah,
first yoga steps to the yoga teacher as profession?
right. I can tell you actually something funny. I don't say that often. So I I remember quite clearly I was studying medicine at the time, and I was starting to feel like I didn't want to work in a hospital all day. I really didn't like that environment, and I wanted to. I was looking for something else. I didn't really know what else I could be doing, like what skills I had apart from the medical skills. And I remember thinking of my yoga teacher at the time, and thinking like, wow, but she's teaching like one or two classes a day. That's it. Or maybe not even, like maybe 4 or 5 classes a week. And she's living, you know? And I was like, that's insane. She doesn't have to work that much. She has so much time.
Mm.
Because one of my criteria was like, I want to have so much time because I want to play the guitar and I want to meditate and I want to do some sports and whatever. And so I remember thinking, like, oh, it could be cool to be a yoga teacher. And also, I would get paid while I'm working out. And I remember that was like, that's awesome. Like, you can do yoga for you. And I love doing yoga. And you just speak at the
Yeah.
same time and then you would get paid. So I was like, that's the dream thing. And then I would be able to maybe even travel a little bit or have a lot of free time. So I think that was like my first thought about teaching yoga. But back at this time, I had no strong or like inspiring figures so much as a yoga
Mm.
teacher that I was like, because I didn't know any male yoga teachers. that I could kind of relate to and see myself in them.
Can I just
And
ask you when that was? Just to give the people
that was
like
like
a
in
timestamp.
that was in the first year literally that I was doing yoga. I already had those thoughts. So that was like in 2017 or something.
Oh wow. Yeah.
Yeah, and so I didn't have any like figure that I was like, oh, that could be me, because they were all
Hmm.
women, and so they had a difference. I don't know. It was very different. I couldn't relate so much, so it was hard for me to see myself as a yoga teacher. And then I took my first yoga teacher training, and I thought, I had no idea I wanted to teach, but when I saw, and that was a man yoga teacher. His name is Mathieu Boldron. He's a French teacher, but he teaches internationally. I did my 200 hours with him, and when I saw him teach for the full month, and I saw how he was living his life as a yogi
Hmm.
and sharing his teaching, like that was it. That was the click that I needed to become a yoga teacher, because I saw and I was so inspired, and I thought, wow, I want to, like a big part of
Yeah.
me was like, I want to be like him. I want to be able to do trainings like this and to share how he's sharing, and to it's beautiful and it's inspiring. So yeah, that was the shift literally in my turn hour. And after this, I started teaching immediately, and I had the feeling like, okay, this is it. This is the thing I need to do.
Oh wow, that's like super inspiring, because I think even out of this we can take a lot, because like this podcast is also about like a lot of boxes and cliches you ways in, and I think not just me but a lot of other people were in your same shoes, that like when you start yoga in 2017, 2018, I mean, you're right, it blew up the last years like crazy. There's so much more out there are so many new teachers, there's so much content on social media. But
Hmm.
back then it was even like hard to find like male yoga teacher role models to get inspired to, and not just just get in touch with that. And even when you start out as a yoga teacher as profession, I mean, you described this like super funny and super like you had already your first thoughts were super positive about that. I think a lot of people would think in the beginning, oh wow, this is a big risk, right? To get like to become a yoga teacher and just teach like 2 hours a day. So I think this needed like a lot of devotion to your own practice, or like
Well,
that
it
you're
was it
really
was a big
convinced.
challenge for me also to make that switch for sure.
Yeah,
Like, because it was a big step into the unknown, and becoming a teacher
oh,
is literally, there's no, especially where I was now, now I know a lot more, and I would be able to give some advice to teachers. I do that actually, but back then I had barely any role models, and there's literally no guide
mm,
into what this lifestyle looks like. It's like an artistic lifestyle, basically. It's like saying
for
I'm going to be
sure.
an artist, basically, and you don't know if it's going to work, if you're going to be able to make a living out of it, if you're going to be able to live it as you want, if people are going to like what you do, or if they're going to hate you. So
Yeah.
you don't know. You just and imagine going from the medical career, which is probably one of the most straightforward careers, because basically everything is, it's not an artistic job so much. Like you choose a specialty, you commit to it, you work there for 5 years, and then somebody offers you a job somewhere else, and let you just follow the flow. So you don't have to think so much about what you're doing in your lives very often. And then going from this to a completely artistic, let's say,
Hmm.
job was pretty scary for me. It was a pretty big step.
And even so, I think like even medical and being a doctor, I mean, it's one of the most, people give you a social rank by this, right? If you
Mhm.
tell them, oh, I'm a doctor. So it's like the implementation of like being safe, also financially, as like you said, like all of your routines. And so making this gap, I think it needs like, wow, you really have to be, I want to do this. I want to go deeper into my own journey as teacher. So what
Right.
is,
I
yeah.
think it was like an ambitious. When I look back, I'm proud of that decision, because it was quite ambitious. Like, it came from a place of like, I want more than what I was kind of predestined to follow. And I
Hmm.
said, I'm going to take the risk to go and ask for even more to life, and to ask for a lifestyle that's even more aligned with how I want to live. Because I want to have some time for myself, and I want to be able to be a bit more free, but at the same time to reach out to people in exactly the way I want. And yeah, I think it's important to dare to like ask for a little bit more sometimes, and to take that risk. And I think ultimately we are rewarded when we do this, because we start to live in alignment with what we truly want.
Yeah, for sure. So Nietzsche said, like, nature loves courage, and I think this is really often true. That in the end, you get rewarded for being like ambitious and just at least take a leap, even if it's out of your comfort zone sometimes.
Right.
Um,
While I will say as a disclaimer,
yeah.
so that not everybody just listening to that podcast will just jump into their own passion, I think it's also important to have a rational plan and to have some
Hmm.
level of like rational thinking about what we're doing, and also to there's like this maybe this Japanese thing called, I think it's called ikigai, which
Yeah.
is like a way to find to make sure that your job is kind of right for you. And it has one of them is like, are you good at it? Which is something like I think is also important to take in consideration. Do I feel like I'm quite skilled or talented into what I'm doing? Because if it's just something we're passionate about, but there's really we're not we don't have a natural ease in it, I think it can be
Hmm.
it can be a struggle, and it ends up being like counterproductive. To be positive on that aspect, but in general, I think it's good to look at it rationally as well before jumping into anything.
For sure. For sure. I think even in this kind of topic, even nowadays, I mean, when like young yogis or young yoga teachers listen to this podcast and get inspired, I mean, it's a hard market, and like you said, it's more like a kind of artistic lifestyle. So even nowadays, there are like the comparison to 10,000 other people. So you have to be really clear about what you
Yeah,
want from life, but as well like what you can offer and what is your specialty and what you really feel wanting to do and what you can teach people, right? So,
absolutely.
but if you have this, I mean, like you said, the lifestyle itself uh, brings you already a lot of joy. And when I follow you on your journey, it's like super interesting to see what you can do out of this, right? I mean, you have like, when I've seen your workshops and your master classes, this is like a
Right,
lot.
definitely. I would add something actually also. It's living a lifestyle that is aligned, I think, is not so much about what you're doing, but how you're doing it, which is a lot of what yoga teaches us actually. So we because of all the social media and all this influencing that we're receiving, we tend to
Hmm.
think that there are certain lifestyles that are amazing, where you get to travel, and there's some truth to that. There's definitely some truth to what you're doing that makes a difference. But I think the main difference is how you're doing it, and how you're approaching it, and how you're living your day-to-day life, and that is where the biggest change can be. So you could do, say, I could still be a doctor and be very fulfilled in my lifestyle if I
Hmm.
maybe arranged it in the right way, Um, and I think there's no job that is meaningless if it's done in a way that is mindful, in a way that is loving, caring. So whatever that profession is and whatever is offered to us, I think there's a beautiful way to take it and to do that. And we don't all need to be influencers, or to be like
Hmm.
traveling yoga teachers or whatever to have an interesting lifestyle. And sometimes actually those lifestyles can hide a lot of loneliness and a lot of sadness, or
Yeah,
behind it. So
for
so
sure.
it's very shiny on the surface, but I think probably the most fulfilled people I've ever met were people who were just very happy in a regular job, that they could really put their heart into it and had a pretty simple lifestyle, not an extravagant or shiny lifestyle.
Hmm. I think this refers also back to the beginning when I asked you, like, um, why should we talk about yoga? And in the end, it's more about that yoga is not just something you're practicing in your physical practice on the mat. It's more about like what you practice as well, like outside the mat in your life and being happy, being fulfilled with what you are doing. You know, yoga
Absolutely.
in the beginning didn't start as asana practice. It started like, yeah, being
That's
in
sometimes
your center.
actually a an interesting like paradox that I believe most
Yeah.
yoga teachers have. I hope I'm not the only one, but that you're preaching a lot of things, and it's not always easy to live by all those principles all the time.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes I come into class and I tell people to be like this, or to embrace this side of themselves, and most of the time I say those things because actually I realize them in my own lives. So basically I realize that I'm not so wise in this area of my life, for example. So I will usually notice that pretty clearly, my own flaws and my own uh, yeah, my own flaws, and then I will see that pretty clearly in myself, and then want to actually share that with my students. And
Mm-hmm.
so if my students didn't know, they could just think that actually all the things that I'm preaching, I've got it figured out. But usually the things that I'm preaching are the things that I've least figured out, and I'm trying to also preach myself in my own classes. It's also a reminder for myself, like if I'm going to tell it to my students, I better live by it. So yeah.
Yeah, but this is absolutely true, and I think this is what defines like a great teacher. You know,
Mm,
that it's not about like that you have figured out everything in life and that you're like guru in this state of like yeah, just being enlightened or anything. That it's more about that you're just a practitioner on your way, and you do what you say, and you can't, nobody is always perfect, nobody is always like
mhm.
so much into his journey like he could be maybe. But I think yoga is preparing us like for the real struggles in our real life, and to practice regularly and make their own experience. I think then you can really teach and you can really show this off to people, and you
Yeah,
integrate this
totally.
in your classes.
I totally agree. You have to be a student basically when you're a teacher. Always, always, always remain a student. That is one of the most important things I've learned so far.
Yeah. So you said in the beginning that you would give like an advice, or you give advices to in your yoga teacher trainings you give nowadays. Could you share one advice you would give like somebody who thinks, okay, this could be my passion, that could be what I want to do?
Hmm. Okay. Oh, that's a tricky one.
Yeah, it's hard
Um,
for sure. Maybe you have something in
yeah,
mind.
no, definitely. There are many things that I could say. I think one of the most important is to, first of all, understand that there is space for any teachers. Anybody who wants to become a teacher, there is space for that. First of all, we're all teachers to some degrees. Like whenever you explain something to somebody, you're being a teacher to them. So
Mm-hmm.
we often think like, will I have enough students in my classes? Will I be able to make a living or whatever? I strongly believe that if you okay, let me put it this way. As a teacher, there's a reason that you were drawn to yoga in the first place as a student.
Mm-hmm.
There is something that really made you want to become a teacher. If you connect deeply to that thing, then you will be unique, and you will have something unique to share, and you will find and you will resonate in some student's mind, and so you will have students. The way that you're a mistake that is commonly made is you look at who's successful and you try to do the same as them, but they're
Mm-hmm.
not successful because they're doing those things. They're successful because they're doing what is authentic to them, and they're doing it in a professional
Mm-hmm.
way,
Yeah,
obviously.
for
Like
sure.
there's like for everything, I think there are two sides to the coin. You would have like the more um you could say the side that is about your purpose, and that is again connecting to why you're here. So let's say you maybe joined, like started doing yoga because of the physical benefits that you felt in your body, or you managed to heal your body or whatever with certain asanas and certain mobility practices or movement practices. Then you have very strong empathy towards that, and you will be a great teacher if you share that with your students, and people will know that it's coming from such an authentic place. You will find your students, and probably you benefited
Mm-hmm.
from more things. And the more you progress and the more you ask yourself those questions, like why am I doing this, what do I want to share to my students. Mm, this is actually the first assignment that I give my students that are doing the apprenticeship with me at the moment, is self-inquiry about what do I want to share with my students on a physical level, on an energetic level, on an emotional level, or spiritual
Mm-hmm.
level. And to ask yourself that question regularly as a teacher is one of the most important things that you can do.
Wow. Yeah, I think this is like a great advice. So, uh,
Yeah, and then the other part would be to be professional, which is also what, like,
yeah.
a lot of teachers are very good at their at being connected to their heart and why they're
Hmm.
doing it and full of passion. But that is awesome, but then you need a tool to share that to others. So you can have all the passion, all the knowledge, and all the most beautiful practice in the world. If you're not able to share professionally that with others, then people are not going to come back to your classes. And that means learning how to cue properly, learning
Hmm.
how to um, demo properly, learning how to give hands-on assist, learning how to use your voice, learning how to sequence, all of those things. So that's kind of like the other, it's the art and the science. That part of the
Hmm.
science and
For sure.
connecting to your art, to your heart is the art.
If we come back like your doctor career, this is like the knowledge you need to have, right? It's like
Right.
the basic lines which like have to make clear and set you apart from like all the people who are just like doing it for a hobby or for like yeah, maybe just for passion, but not about like being really professional in what they're doing and want to make a living out of that. But even the
Yeah.
combination.
Yeah,
Yeah.
like being a doctor, for example, you could compare it to, so a good doctor would be somebody who um, is deeply compassionate and has a lot of empathy for his patients and is able to show a lot of care and love and
Mhm.
be a good person, maybe even be funny and be good to be around and have this beautiful energy when they enter the room. But they also need to know what they're doing and to know that they're putting the right doses of
That would be
anesthetic
good.
when they're yeah, so you need those two things,
Mm-hmm.
and I noticed that the teachers who are successful, who in their own degree, of success, like
Yeah.
what success means to you, they have those two things. They have the heart and they have the tools to be professional and to be heard.
I really love that. I will note that down for sure. Um,
Yeah.
let me see, and I think you already answered a lot of this topic now when we know you a bit better now. But exactly what you said. What do you think is the unique way or like your approach, which you give back to your students and you want to represent in your style of yoga? We talked about this in the pre-talk a bit, that you don't really label your style because you integrate like what really feels good for you and what you think is pretty beneficial. But could you give people who want maybe also to join one day a class of you or master class in, yeah, if you, what do you share?
um it's funny because I that question just keeps, I still don't have the complete answer, but I feel that I'm like, maybe just last week I got a lot closer to it even than I ever was at
Oh wow.
answering that question, and I realized because I was taking some other teachers' classes, and I
Mm-hmm.
realized, like, what do I like about it? What do I like less about it? Why, and how does my style differ from their style? And I was questioning myself about, like, why is my style so different than theirs? And then I realized it's probably because what we gain from yoga as individuals is different. And so they gained a lot from this thing, so they're teaching that, which is what I was
Mm-hmm.
explaining earlier. And I gained something else, so I'm teaching my classes this way. And we're both successful teachers. And so I was I was reflecting on that and I came to the conclusion I like my classes to be flowy and I like people to get out of their mind. And then I realized, like, why that was actually the main benefit that I got from yoga. Like, the tremendous shift that yoga brought to my life was that I was doing a practice of embodiment where, and what I really enjoyed from taking classes was being able to lose myself in the flow, which is basically something that was very, very different from my previous lifestyle of calculation and rational thinking and memorization, which was very, very up in the head. So
Yeah.
if you look at the energy in the body, it would be like the energy would be really high in the head of like thinking, thinking, thinking. And what that practice gave me was lowering that energy towards my body, towards my heart, towards my hips, towards my feet. And I get that the most when I'm in a class and I'm able to be guided so well by the teacher that I just forget. I can almost close my eyes and just flow and enter that state. And that's basically the I don't know. In my opinion, one of the main benefits that I got, and so that I want to share with my students. So I think that defines my style a little bit. It's a style where I like to move away from the headspace. There are lectures, and we are speaking about things, and we're understanding things, but I feel like the main benefit is just from the practice itself and getting lost into that physicality.
I think this is like super like interesting because I think yoga is one of the few things which like brings you out of your body and into like a state of mind where you can really feel that you combine breath, movement, focus.
Mhm.
And I think so for me it was actually exactly the same because I did never had this patience for meditation and seated to like close my head off and just feel my body and really relate to my movement and my breath. And I think this is like really, really special about when we talk not about just the asana practice, but like yoga or classes in general and styles as a kind of experience you provide to your students. And so I think this is like a big value which you can provide out of your classes and which will like is super needed right now actually.
Yeah, definitely. This is also part of my realization is that people. I feel that that's what people need. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
of course, not everyone in the world. I think a lot of people are embodied, but I don't know. The I feel like we're in such a heady world. Also, just the values today, especially of capitalism, is to be able to use your brain and to to calculate things. And to most people are working in front of computers, which is one of the least embodied things you can do because you're just all in your eyes and in your brain
Yeah.
and in the like those neural circuits. Um, so it's kind of a counter to that. Of course, if we were all day in nature and living by growing food in the earth or whatever, we would probably not need this type of yoga as much. But for a city lifestyle and a modern lifestyle, I think this is one of the most productive counters that we can do is just going to yoga and,
Mm-hmm.
and being
Even in
being.
this urban environment, yeah,
Mhm.
for sure. um what do you think if you look now back on all of this and your journey, did did you would like to change anything, or is there anything you think you would have changed if you have like the knowledge from now?
You mean on my journey as a yoga teacher or in my life
In
in general?
general, in your whole life, I think this is like
Hmm.
most interesting, because I always have these realizations when I get further on my journey. I have and I'm definitely not on the end of this journey, but I always have the feeling that I get back to points, but I realized it's not like getting back in a circle, it's more getting back on a spiral upwards and have my past experience.
Hmm. Difficult one to answer, but I would say Um, I would probably tell my past self to trust more. Like trust is something that I've had a hard time with, which resulted in me wanting to control things a lot.
Mhm.
So when you don't have trust, you feel like you need to control all the elements of your faith, which has some positive aspects. I think there is a certain amount of controlling that is necessary in our life. That we need to make
You
rational
think?
decisions about certain things and to try to um, push till the end so that the outcome is favorable. But from a lot of things, I would have benefited. I would have gained a lot of time and gained a lot of efforts and saved a lot of effort and saved a lot of energy if I had actually simply trusted the process and trusted my deeper, let's say, wisdom,
Hmm.
which is related to what I like to teach. Basically, it comes down to that. Like going into the body
Yeah.
is not just to become dumb. Is actually so that you don't think anymore and you're just like, oh, I'm in my body. I feel good. No,
Mm,
the one of the main reasons is that now you're tapping into a higher intelligence, or at least you're adding another intelligence to your brain because your brain, don't worry,
sure.
will always keep working. But you're now tapping into the intelligence of the body, which knows so much. And even scientifically, you can look at like the fact that your um, digestive system has a brain of its own, which can like kind of function independently from your regular brain, and that just tells you that there is another form of intelligence in your body. And I think it's not just the digestive system; it might be the all of your autonomous nervous system and more. But there is, even scientifically, we can understand that there is more intelligence than what we give credit for, and that the moment that we start to focus a little bit more on what we feel and get maybe a little bit spiritual as well, we can actually tap into something that is, yeah, we can add some intelligence to ourselves, and it becomes easier and we make better decisions most of the time.
I really like how you bring these topics of like spiritualism and like I think kind of philosophic parts of yoga into like kind of modern translation, because I think this
Mm,
is actually something which is like really hard as well in the yoga community or the yoga
right.
community. Yeah, you have like super esoteric people for sure, and there
Mhm.
is like a lot of boxes and cliches about yoga
Mm,
and all of this. So I think it's super important to bring some of these topics like you do really rational on the one hand, but even like giving the people the option to create this space so they can experience for themselves how this feels. I think this is like
absolutely.
super important, and even nowadays more. Do you see specifically for yourself, or like on your yoga journey, like boxes or cliches about yoga, which you think not longer suit yoga in general, or not should not like be in between somebody on his way to start with
Mm.
yoga or start to become a yoga teacher, maybe as well?
Yeah, there are a few. Um, I could just say one more thing related to what we
Mm-hmm.
were talking about, which is that, yeah, there's definitely, I think, the ability to, I like to relate to myself when I started yoga. I was the least esoteric guy in the room. And I didn't want to chant Om or whatever, because I was like, what is this? Um, so I always think back on myself, and I have a lot of empathy for people who are joining, and who are, yeah, who have are from a different background. And I think we should take that in account when we teach, and be very, um, how can I say, very empathetic, and understand that, and explain what we're doing, and
Mm-hmm.
never become niche. Always try to include as many people as possible, to a certain degree. It's, it's obviously impossible to include everybody, but to
Sure.
extend that, and to explain things, and to make sure that, yeah. So I think keeping one foot in maybe the scientific world, which is an important and real world, and is the reason why we can speak on our computers right
Mm-hmm.
now, and the more spiritual world and esoteric, and a world of images is so important. And when you can have both, I think you really get the best of both worlds. So I've tried to always not fall too much onto either one or the other. It's difficult sometimes, but I definitely try to keep some balance there.
Yeah. Well,
And about the boxes that you were saying, there definitely are. I think especially for men, as we're two guys talking right now, but there's
yeah.
definitely, like, it's harder for men to see themselves maybe practicing. Like, they're like, oh, if only women go there, maybe it's not meant for me. I think that's one of the things. The other limitations, that you need to be flexible to do yoga. That's a classic one. But obviously, I mean, I was not flexible at all when I started yoga, like really, really not. So if you're not flexible, actually, that's the reason why you should go to yoga, because yoga makes you more flexible. You don't need to be flexible, but um, actually, if you're too flexible, it can be even a little bit boring to
Yeah.
do yoga, because you're not going to feel much happening in your body. But when you're tight, you feel. So the experience is profound.
Yeah,
Mm,
I think there are definitely points in there. For sure, this kind of flexibility is also kind of the label, right? So I think it's really, at least in the Western society at the moment, really associated with like the feminine. And so I
mm,
think it's even, yeah, on this social media world, harder nowadays to get like, I think nowadays it's easier to find role models, which are maybe already men, but it's harder to see yourself as the person you are in your actual situation, and not like comparing yourself to like the most flexible person in the world or the most like trained person in the world. And so,
Mm.
yeah, I think there's definitely some truth in this. Would you think that uh, if you could change these boxes of yoga, I think, like you explained before, with your style of yoga, how you try to be the bridge between like the scientific world or like the
Hmm.
spiritual world. But is there something in specific you do to like try to include more people in yoga, or like to more, yeah, bring this
Yeah,
message
like I
out?
mentioned, it's a few things. One thing, like I mentioned, is to explain. So if you're
Mm-hmm.
gonna do it's to not assume that everybody is familiar with what you're teaching. Obviously, sometimes they are. Like if I teach a retreat, I know that
Yeah.
by day 2 or 3, I can start to. I don't need to explain what Om is or why we're doing this exercise of pranayama or breathing exercise. We can just do it. To some degree, I always try to keep that empathy towards everybody and know that like there are probably people in my classes, like in Berlin. I know that
Mm.
especially in the big classes, there's at least a few people, it's their first yoga class ever. There's at least like one person, it's their first yoga class ever. So, I try to like keep that in mind and keep them in mind in the way that I'm talking. So that means not using, so I would say one of the rules, and I think that's a general rule for yoga teachers, is not using jargon. I don't
Yeah.
know if that's the right word. Yeah. Jargon too much. So, you might say the words and the names of the poses in Sanskrit, for example, but also maybe tell them in English.
What to
If
do?
you
Yeah.
yeah, if you're telling like a concept, just explain a bit of background, make it relatable for our lifestyles. Because if you just say, yeah, in the Yoga Sutra 2.3, they say that, like, and you just go on into like a super deep explanation of that without, I feel like you're losing people. So one thing that I do, for example, is
Mm-hmm.
that I often like to talk about my own day-to-day experiences to talk about a philosophical topic. Like I'll say, oh, um, yesterday, I thought about my friend who used to steal in the supermarkets when we were kids, and it made me reflect on Asteya, And I tell this little story that is
Mm-hmm.
everyone can relate to. Or like you'll say, okay, talking about Asteya, non-stealing. How we all steal blankets in the airplane, for example, like the blankets they provide. That's like a good one to think of and just
Make
make it
everybody
relatable
think.
instead of
Yeah, for sure.
instead of talking about things that are completely imaged or too deep. Yeah.
That's that's a great one.
Also, I would say one other way is to make the physical practice accessible, which means, um, and that's one reason maybe for that I like to teach the style that I teach and to teach Vinyasa and teach it how I do,
Mm-hmm.
is that I make it, for example, I put a lot of emphasis on warming up the body before getting into certain poses. So I try to make it an experience that is really accessible, and there's not going to be a lot of lotuses in my classes, for example. I know that
Mm-hmm.
it's not a pose that's universally accessible for people. So that would be something I would teach only in a master class or in a training if there's plenty of explanation to do it. So compared to certain styles that just throw in those poses in, and that can sometimes be a bit injurious, I like to really do a practice that is safe for even somebody who's never done any yoga
Mm-hmm.
before or even any physical exercise, because it's mainly built on strength and creating stability. And then only when that stability is established
Then
can
you
we start
build
to
the,
maybe open the body a little bit more. And
for sure, for sure. I think this relates pretty good also to what we talked about before in the pre-talk, that it's most of the time more about the individual than about the tradition. And yoga are
Mhm.
more about like, oh, it has to be like this or it has to be like this. And like you said, I think in the end it's about building this balance between power and flexibility and mobility, which makes people really healthy and give them the space to explore and to play around and maybe get lost of their mind while they're doing
Yeah,
so. Um,
yeah, and we have a lot of data today, scientific data about
mhm.
how what is good for the body in the long run. How do we prevent
Yeah,
injuries? How do we make a body, injury proof? We have a lot of data in this, and so I think applying this in your yoga classes is something really important
yeah.
that we can start doing.
So maybe one question before I had on, because this is like you. have like maybe a way deeper input into this, you have any resources as like kind from the anatomy or from the research part which you would recommend for people, which is maybe not typical basic yoga books, but maybe something you find really interesting or which changed your kind of practice or approach to yoga?
Hmm. I got a lot of knowledge from some yoga books, but there are a few books and resources that I can recommend that are not directly in the field of yoga, but that inspired me a
Mm-hmm.
lot. Um, you can look at Anatomy Trains, which is a classic, especially today, it's very popular,
Yeah.
about basically the fascias and myofascial meridians in the body. And that I think is going to be very interesting to look at as a yoga teacher if you want to understand how fascia works and how the lines are designed and everything. It can be really interesting.
Yeah.
Uh, there, well, actually, like a teacher like Dylan Werner made his entire style around the myofascial meridians, and it's a very interesting. Physically, it's extreme. I think it's very interesting what he's doing on in terms of like making the body functional and strong, and it's really great. Um, you could look at, I think another figure that probably inspired me is, I mean, is the entire movement culture that's going on, like Ido Portal and all of this.
Yeah.
I think the exploration of even like the concept that there's no movement that's wrong, basically, that was like a huge thing. And that's a huge thing
Yeah.
with yoga, which tells you there is one way to do a pose and alignment. And when you understand that actually any movement that the body can do pretty much almost is healthy for the body because
Mm-hmm.
you're basically strengthening different muscles and you're putting your body in different stresses. So the body is anti-fragile, meaning it's if you stress it to a certain extent, it will actually become stronger. So like if you stress a ligament or if you stress a bone or if you stress the muscles, the tendons or fascia in a certain way, it will go under stress, become a little bit weaker temporarily, and then build back up to a slightly higher level than it was originally. And that's the beautiful thing. A piece of wood
Mm-hmm.
is fragile, so it's not like that. If you put pressure on a piece of wood over and over again, and at some point it just breaks. Um, so
Yeah.
that with that philosophy, for example, which is it's basic biomechanics, but we understand that putting stress in the body and actually in one example that I like is being able to, for example, invert your ankles, meaning like you turn your ankles towards the inside. For example,
Yeah.
being able to bear your weight on the side of your ankles feels like terrible alignment in yoga, and you would never do this. But it's actually, yeah, to tear a ligament in your ankle if you actually do those types of exercises. So that realization, this kind of Ido
Wow.
Portal
Yeah.
philosophy of just trying different things, being creative with your movement, and kind of forgetting about the rules, I think is super important. It's something that I apply, and I would recommend exploring. And there's just thousands of people that do those kind of stuff.
For sure. Even if you start realizing that yoga, if you go high.
Maybe one more that I would add is
Yeah.
is actually something I haven't studied, but FRC, functional range conditioning. I've never studied it. I know done a course or whatever, but I know
Mm-hmm.
what it's about, and I've practiced it to some extent,
Yeah.
and which is basically like the philosophy of and ranges of motion and active ranges of motion in the body, which is a pretty basic concept, but it's applying that to yoga also super interesting and super healthy for the body to
Mm-hmm.
be able to control your limbs and and your hip and external rotation and to be able to do that without any external force. So that would be one more that I think is today very uh, it's very usually very often sprinkled into yoga classes. You will see it naturally, and it's part of those more modern things.
Super
And
interesting.
more to explore would be like I know there are some teachers that are exploring things with like the nerves, so very neurological kind of approach to movement. Also, how to, nerve flossing, neurodynamics, and even like nervous system activation through different exercises.
Mm-hmm.
Super interesting. So it's blooming everywhere. I think if you just look and you keep your eyes open, there's so many sources of inspiration for creating movement that is that is very good for the body in the long term, and to which you add obviously the the core of what yoga is, which is the mindfulness, which is the breath, which is all of those things.
For sure. And even so, I think this is like we said before in the talk, there is so much space out there for like finding your own style, finding your own voice, and your own like unique style you want to represent. So I think there's so much good to do still out there. So definitely, I think I can recommend all of this to everybody who wants to get deeper into like a modern approach of yoga. That's super cool. Alex, if there would be like one message you would like to share with as many people as possible, what would that be?
That's not hard to think. This one is an easy question.
Okay, at least I got like one.
Yeah, one of them was easy to answer. It's not easy to put in words actually, but it's easy to answer. The message would be go vegan,
Mm-hmm.
live vegan. And I know that I don't like to start by saying that usually because it's triggering for people. Because veganism is associated with so much
Yeah,
that just saying those words like makes most people just block certain parts and just don't want to listen. So I usually never say even the word vegan until the end of what I'm saying, what I'm talking about, but I'll just be really straightforward. Um,
same like in yoga,
there
right?
is,
Boxes and cliches, like super
yeah, yeah,
many labels
exactly,
around that.
exactly, exactly. Um, I think it's simply about having the realization that we might be very different from animals in so many ways, in the ways that we look and that we communicate and in our behaviors, but that there is no significant difference between animals and us humans
Mm-hmm.
on a moral standpoint that justifies doing what we do to animals. That means, and that thing that we share is sentience, is our ability to feel pain and
Mm-hmm.
suffering and fear and also joy and happiness and contentment, and and the fact that we share that should really make us reconsider the way we treat them. I think when you start to see that humanity, and literally I mean humanity, in all animals,
Yeah.
then there is no way you can pay people to abuse them, and do what we do to them. And what I
Mm-hmm.
would recommend on a um, practical way is to get informed about what those industries of the meat and dairy and egg industry are doing. And
Yeah.
I will also recommend. I think that it's very fair to say that you should be able to watch videos of what's going on in a slaughterhouse or in a
Mm-hmm.
farm or things like that. You know, it's not. It's just know where your food comes from or what you're doing or what
True.
you're paying for is. And I would say that even more, like for me, what made me go vegan was not the slaughterhouse footage. I had seen that a lot, and I was still not vegan for a while.
Mm-hmm.
What made me change was actually seeing sanctuary videos from animal sanctuaries, where I was actually seeing how happy
Wow.
those same animals that were being killed in that other video could be.
Yeah.
That was because, you can always think like, yeah, but they're getting killed. It's horrible. There's blood everywhere. But it's okay because they don't know better. They have nothing more to live for.
Mm-hmm.
But when puppy would, like a dog would, and then you see that, or you see a pig rolling on its back for belly rubs, and you see them like uh, roaring for like cuddles or something like that. When you see that, then you realize, okay, now there's a dissociation.
This is
I
yeah.
cannot commit that to them.
Wow. This is so a coincidence because actually, no joke, like last week when I've been in Sri Lanka, I was filming like I've never seen a baby cow running, you know,
Mm.
and there was just a cow on the field, and it was like running like a dog. I have never seen a baby cow running and playing around, and I was doing the story and was like, wow, you don't see
Cows
this.
are like big dogs, literally.
Yeah.
Cows are like they behave the same. It's insane, and they will do the same. So I had a dog for many years, and
Mm.
cows will like do the same kind of jumping
Wow.
around motions of like playfulness that dogs would. So if we wouldn't want to treat dogs by sending them into slaughterhouses and have their genitals cut off
Mm,
and their throat cut off and cut into pieces, then I don't think we should pay somebody to do that to cows. And
for
the
sure.
main thing is like people will basically have reasons for doing it because I think profoundly most people understand that it's wrong to kill a sentient being. But if you have a reason, it doesn't make it
Hmm.
wrong anymore, which is true.
Sure.
But the reasons that we do it are very, very weak. And
Yeah.
today we know that we can be healthy and actually healthier, um, but even just at least as healthy. And we're on a plant-based diet, and it's accessible, and I'm not talking about maybe some remote places in earth where it's not, then I wouldn't say anything to them. But
Yeah.
for people who are listening to us and have access
For
to
sure.
food, and to a supermarket, there's never been more choices in the entire world. You can eat anything you want, you have all the options. Even now there's like a lot of vegan options of the things we might be really drawn to. So there's
Hmm.
really no excuse anymore to keep abusing animals in 2024, I think. And
Thank you so much for bringing
yeah.
this topic up here, because I think it's like also super, super important for me as well. And I think even related to yoga, just on the philosophy part, everybody knows the Ashtangas or like the 8 limbs of yoga. And
Hmm.
yeah, definitely,
Ahimsa, yeah.
you should you should be always aware of this. Um, I think there's a lot of, even if there are a lot of cliches and boxes around it, like you said, and a lot of people will maybe like, yeah, shut down.
On a yeah, and on a larger scale, I think that as long as we stay violent towards animals, we will really struggle as a species to bring peace to the world and to
For
bring
sure.
harmony even in our hearts. Like, how can we kill billions and billions of sentient beings every year?
Hmm.
Like, it's,
Just
every second it's thousands of animals who are just
and
being killed brutally. With
yeah,
that amount of violence happening in the world, there is no chance that we can
yeah.
find peace, between us, amongst us. So
I
even on a selfish reason, it's
mm,
like I think it's really necessary for this awakening that we want to have,
yeah,
as
and I
human
think
beings.
even like you said before, I think the best approach actually is like, because again there are like a lot of topics. Some stuff is true, some not, about like scientific facts and everything. In the end, if you break it down, and the best thing you can do and you can show is like to show people like happy animals, how they could
Mm,
live, how it should could be close to
right.
us. It's like just so surreal that if we
Hmm.
would come to another planet and see this, it would be like super surreal for us. It
Yeah,
would be like,
definitely.
so
Definitely.
yeah. Uh, okay, so to close up with another short topic, Alex, I think this was like an amazing talk already. So for people who want to get to know more about you, to want to get in touch with you, or yeah, to maybe want to join you with your explorations of classes, master classes, workshops. So what are your contact details, and what are you currently working on? What are your projects?
The easiest way to keep up with what I do is probably Instagram. I'm not as active as I wish I was on there, but everything is still there, and I usually post the most important things. And there's also links in the bio to my website and everything. It's
Mhm.
Alex Perez Yoga. Um, and things that are upcoming that are important. I have a few teacher trainings this year that are really exciting, especially a 300-hour teacher training that I will be teaching in Italy in September. It's divided in 2 times 150 hours, and the second module is in Berlin in October, November. So this is really where I share uh, most of the some of the things we were talking about: how to
Mhm.
become a professional yoga teacher, how to find both your authenticity, your heart, and to be able to transmit that, to have the right tools to transmit that to your students. It's not, it takes it takes understanding certain things and certain rules to be able to be professional. And apart from that, I have a few workshops coming up in Paris in May and Geneva in May, and just a few teacher trainings. The best is to look it up on my website and to stay up to date. You can also sign up to my newsletter, where I send about one email every 2 years there. But
The
it's
most
still, I'm not
important
so
ones.
proficient with this, so you won't get spammed, that's for sure. But and usually when I have like an important retreat or something, I do send an email there.
That's super cool. So, yeah, Alex, it was a pleasure to have you here.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me.
I would,
Great to chat.
yeah, for sure. Okay, so bye.
Thanks a lot.